So, welcome to Straight Talking Law. Today's episode covers an incredibly difficult and sensitive topic: what happens legally after the loss of a child. Whether you're a parent, carer, or someone supporting a family through grief, we hope this conversation can offer clarity and comfort. So, I'm Abby. I'm a family solicitor and director here at Kidwells, and I specialise in both family and criminal matters, which are quite wide-ranging. And next to me, I've got Jake. Hi, Jake.
Hi there.
And what area do you specialise in?
So at the moment, I'm in private client and in civil litigation. So I'm here with my private client hat on to discuss these topics.
Yeah, brilliant. And Jake's exceptional at the work that he does. And he's absolutely excellent with his client care too, which is really paramount at a time like this when you're dealing with something so sensitive. So please note, listeners, that this discussion does include references to child loss, which some listeners may find distressing. So, Jake, going into your role first about probate and more practical matters, really, what have you got to say about that today?
Yeah, sure. So a big consideration when something like this occurs is dealing with probate and understanding it, because many people don't really know what probate is, regardless if it's for a child or for an adult.
It's a word you hear a lot about, but nobody, unless you've dealt with it directly, it can be quite difficult to understand, can't it?
Yeah, it's difficult to associate really what probate can be. And a lot of the time, there isn't really a hard or fast rule. But what I tend to stick to is an estate, if it's worth less than £5,000, that's when probate isn't technically required. And it's quite rare that occurs for adults, but it can be quite common for children, especially young children. So when someone's estate, which I should add, an estate, when I say that, is a collection of someone's worth after they've passed away. So for an adult, that can be quite complex with bank accounts and stock holdings and shares and a car. For children, it can be a lot more simple, and it could just be, their own personal items.
Yes, yeah. So, and I think, the immediate aftermath of the loss leads to lots of different things, doesn't it, in your area of law in particular? Can you take us through some of that, Jake?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the most important things you need to do quite quickly is register the death. And that can be one of the most difficult things to do because it's so fresh after the passing.
Emotionally, I would imagine that would be quite difficult. You're trying to just come to terms with the loss of a child, and suddenly you've got to think of practical matters, which might feel a bit insensitive.
Exactly that. On top of the fact that you need to leave the house to go and do it, you need to speak to people you've never met. You've got to recount details of, this event that you don't want to speak of, and it can be a real task to get through. So it can be too much for people. And so what you can do is appoint a close relative to inform of the bereavement on your behalf. The only point to consider in that is that if you do it this way, the documents you will receive to really carry on, they'll turn up in the post instead of being handed to you, so it can delay such things as the funeral.
Yeah, that's quite awful, really, isn't it? And you're well used to, Jake, dealing with people at a very difficult time in their lives and in their roles. And I know that from feedback that we've received about you and your role, you are very pragmatic, but you're also very empathetic. You deal with people really well. And I think the message to people generally is that actually at a time like that, which is probably the most difficult time of your life, you might not be thinking straight. So perhaps if you're unsure, consult a solicitor, build a relationship with somebody you trust, and they can take you through the process. And it does take a lot of weight off people's shoulders, doesn't it?
Exactly that. I always liken it. They have a large administrative headache that is the last thing they want to deal with. And so sometimes if you're involving a solicitor, even in small quantities, it can help relieve that. And people like us, we deal with this quite literally day in, day out. And unfortunately, I'd say you do build up a sort of resistance to it. So while it's entirely understandable that the person who's lost someone very close to them is struggling so much in their own right, they can rely on a solicitor who really, I'd say, is quite hardened to it and can help them see clearly what needs to be done.
Yes, absolutely. I think it takes the emotion sometimes out of the decisions that need to be made, which can be helpful, because our job, of course, is to assist people and put them in the best position legally, also help manage their costs and get into that point. And in doing so, we do need to be careful that we don't fall into the role of a counsellor that we will deal with shortly after in this podcast. So in terms of the family court, Jake, and thank you for explaining that so well, because it is really quite an awful thing, isn't it? Somebody losing a child so young, and that, you know, the reality is the likelihood of you ever having discussed with your child what they would want should they pass, or having a will in place is, well, second to none, really, isn't it? Because we never want to think that that kind of thing will happen. So in terms of the family courts, they can play quite a crucial role in the loss of a child, ensuring that the child's remaining family members are supported and any necessary investigations are conducted thoroughly, and particularly for people that are children that are looked after in the care environment. The courts can involve determining care arrangements for surviving siblings and liaising with coroners regarding investigations, which is, again, quite an awful and sensitive thing, especially if your child is in the system, in the care system. You'll be aware that your child has sadly passed. However, you need to really deal with somebody that you can trust in order to make sure that everybody's looked after in the necessary way. Now, if a child does die whilst under the care of the local authority, the court may need to address the future arrangements for any remaining siblings. Of course, this can be an awfully terrible time for the siblings, and this could involve deciding on care orders, supervision orders, or other measures to protect the welfare of the surviving children. And something that can occur is a dispute can arise between guardians and parents, for example. And I think this feeds into what you've been talking a little bit about, Jake, and that's if a child has a testamentary guardian, so a guardian that's been appointed by a will, sometimes there can be a dispute which arises between the guardian and the surviving parent, which might need to then lead to the intervention of the family court, and they'll decide on the most appropriate care arrangements. And so this is clearly a very complex area of law, I think. It links also into criminal and inquest proceedings, and criminal investigations themselves can take an awfully long time, and inquests can also delay other legal matters. I'm sure that they would delay, you know, your role in terms of probate, Jake, as well. And that can be really frustrating for people. Not only are they having to come to terms with something that's awful as losing your child, and having to go through an awfully long-winded legal process that can sometimes be hindered a little bit and delayed by inquests and investigations. It's clearly an emotional time for anybody involved, which leads me into, Jake, the emotional and legal support for families out there. Now, we know from dealing closely with lots of people that there are, you know, lots of support out there for people. And that could be support groups, that could be counselling, etc. And whilst we support people, our job isn't to counsel them. You know, we charge for our services, and we have to be careful of that. And it's important that people are getting the right support and guidance from those that are qualified to do so. Of course, we're qualified in the areas that we are, but we're not counsellors, are we?
No, and it becomes quite complex when, especially with probate, you're speaking with these people day in, day out, and they really can become, you know, almost a new sort of friend in that time. And when they're dealing with a loss and they've got other people coming into their lives, it's really important that that division does remain, because you're very right. We're not counsellors. We're not trained for that. We're trained to deal with the instructions we have, and so making sure that clear line is in place for them is extremely important. Yeah.
And that's something we do every day, isn't it? We manage people's expectations and make our role quite clear. And whilst we're not counsellors, empathy is important, and empathy is important in any solicitor that you instruct, because you need to be able to give and build a good relationship with them so that you can trust them to deal with your future, your assets, whatever it might be that you're instructing a solicitor for. You can trust them to make the right decisions and assist you through that process. And that's where empathy comes in, but there is a clear line between that and counselling somebody, which is not what we're here for. And you would need proper legal support and bereavement supports through such an awful time. And so I think that leads us really down to our closing reflections, Jake. And it can be quite a hard job that we do because we're dealing with very emotional things in people's lives. But actually, as you've rightfully said, our job is to remove that emotion, to assist that person, to build up a relationship with them, make the right decisions, act in their best interests, but also ensure that the costs are proportionate in doing so. And as I'm sure you've experienced, Jake, if somebody feels that they need to come to you at every waking moment of every day because they need the emotional support from you, which we're not qualified to give, that does impact their costs, which can create other problems in their lives, which we're not here to create. So I think the message out of this is it's complex, just as everything is, unfortunately. It's complex. I think if you need a solicitor and deal with any matters such as this or anything closely that might have been closely related in this podcast, you need to try and find a solicitor. And when you speak to that solicitor, you need to interview them and ensure that you're happy with them and that you can trust them. And I just want to thank the listeners to listening for this incredibly important and emotional conversation. We know that no legal processes can lessen the pain of losing a child, but understanding your rights and responsibilities can in time offer a small sense of control and support. If you're affected by anything we've discussed, please consider reaching out to a solicitor for legal advice or to a bereavement charity. If you'd like to speak to us at Kidwell Solicitors, please do not hesitate to give us a call on 01432 278 179 and rest assured we will do our very best to assist you. Take care and we'll see you in the next episode.